Oh,
Wow.
hey, everybody. Welcome to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am very excited. We got Jay rejoining us. If I can point in the right direction, there he is. And I'm stoked to get this started. We're going to be talking about justice today, and that is a
Nice.
fantastic conversation. So I am stoked. Jay, why don't you give us a quick, actually, before we do that, I'm getting ahead of myself and I don't want anybody else to get ahead of themselves. So make sure you're doing the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which of course Wednesdays for the Gold Mine and Fridays for the Collective. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section and we can hit those throughout the show. Other than that, let's get to the intros now. Jay, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. Hit it up.
Sure. Jay Subquich. I'm from Northern Ontario. I'm a father of 3. I'm a husband. I'm a farmer and 20-year police veteran.
Bam. So you know a thing or two about the idea of justice. I'm liking it. Shaun?
Oh, that's yet to be determined. Let's
we'll see.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Chance. You've already done it once. Don't do it twice.
Well, I got to be held accountable. So I'm going to give you guys opportunities to hold me accountable and we'll be good to go. So,
Perfect.
let's get into this because I have some ideas. Correction, I have some videos here and we have all kinds of justice. I had this conversation with my wife earlier when we were talking about the show today. And she was like, well, what does justice even mean? And I was like, that's the part of the conversation. So we're going to get into this right off the bat, unless you guys got anything to say before we do. Shaun, I know you always got. Shaun's always got something to say. I can see it in the back of his head, but let's get it started. Here we go.
It was legal. Colonialism was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Apartheid was legal. Legality is a matter of power, not justice. This is so spot on. Legality is the playground of the powerful, a game where the rules are written by those who hold the pen. So often legality is backed by might, not right. The rule book on legality often skips the chapter on humanity. If you look at the justice system in America, it's about who's in charge and not really what's fair or just. So when we talk about what's legal, let's not confuse that with what's moral, ethical, or fair. Because the past and present are full of laws that are downright vile. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake power for justice and legality for righteousness.
Bam. So I wanted to hit that right off the bat because I think a lot of people integrate those two things, that legality and justice are the same thing, and they're not. Let's get some thoughts on it. Jay, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, the word justice comes from an ancient word, justitia, which actually meant righteousness a long time ago. So unfortunately, I do believe from thousands of years ago during an ancient legal system where righteousness had a different definition. In modern times, I think it's been bastardized and usurped by the law or by government in order to enforce certain things. But there is a big conundrum in there, and it's very easy to see. This is a massive philosophical debate, right? Because what I think is righteous isn't necessarily what anybody else thinks is righteous. And so it's difficult because we all have an inborn bias. So I think you have to look at what justice means inside and then try and weave that into your own moral and ethical compass. When you set aside what is written in stone in the country you live in, which would be sort of the written law, that is what I think is sort of the bastardized version of what justice is. And then, contained within there, because it's a massive spectrum, is where the moral and ethical conundrums come from, because justice is a perspective.
Yeah. When I put that post out when we were talking about getting the show started, what I was reading was stating that justice is actually a internal aspect. It's a personal thing rather than an external thing that you need justice done upon someone else. It's about seeking our own justice and our own way of living in a just manner. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons that justice is less just than it should be, or to Jay's point, he was thinking about justice and he was thinking about it as what is righteous and what isn't. And he also mentioned, some ancient history about where justice came from, the word, etc. And I believe it, like ancient Egypt at the time, was the code, the rule of Hammurabi. That might be like a Disney movie. I don't even know, but it's Hammurabi, something like that. I forget. That's way back in the back.
Hammurabi.
There you go. So, we've had codes and rules and justice structures for thousands of years. And how justice evolves is not through people, I believe. I believe that justice evolves through the structure of justice. Justice in itself has taken on its own construct and evolves itself through codes and rules and protocols and processes. The processes refine the processes. And it's less about humans and it's more about now the rule of law. And so way back in the day, you know, if someone did wrong, the community kind of assessed, judged, and threw stones at them. And so now we have our modern version where less communal opinion is taken into account and more process takes over the process. And so, to the key word, as Jay was speaking, he thinks. Well, Jay thinks in a way that Jay thinks, but his neighbor thinks differently, and the neighbor on the other side thinks differently. And the reason all of that thought is different is because we're never schooled in what justice means, and more correctly, what is right and what is wrong. We're never schooled in school. Did you attend Justice 101 in elementary school or junior high or senior high or college or university? It had lots of different names, maybe in university, like, Justice 101, but it's less about the communal, what's right and wrong, and it's more about the code of law and what's right and wrong. So I believe that human agency, human conscious right and wrong has been stripped out of the equation more than it should have been. And that is because the agency of thought from a young age has never been fostered.
I agree with you on that, but I think I want to take a slightly different angle on this because you're talking about community justice in terms of somebody does something wrong, it goes in front of the council of elders or the community or whatever. But by putting it in front of a bunch of other people, say a particular transgression, they don't have any experience. Like the community doesn't have an experience within that
because it was never taught righteousness. Like, at what point does someone understand what's righteous? Like, our three opinions right now on what's righteous will be different. True. Because it's self-evolved, self-thought, self-taught, self-learned, self-observed. None of us are attending weekly understandings of what is righteous. And by the way, what I think is righteous today, a year from now will be different based on how I live my life, my own personal experiences. And that doesn't get codified into a master code called a global or a universal righteousness code. It's just Shaun's way of living.
Yeah. Well, you said
I think is right and wrong taught to me by the world, you know?
You said the word evolution, and I think that's important to understand justice from ancient times when the word was first developed to what it is now, because there's like a cultural zeitgeist built around justice. You know, justice in the Western Hemisphere is way different than justice in the Central Plains of Africa, where tribes have been using the same form of justice for 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000 years. And who's to say that that's wrong and it's right here? You know, we've all heard of a few tribes. There's a few tribes in Papua New Guinea, and then there's also some isolated tribes where they will literally murder you on sight. And nobody bats an eye at that. And yet it's still in the broader definition, it's still murder. So is it still just? And that is that's a huge conundrum. That is a global problem because there's no such thing as global justice. There are pockets of culturally specific law, and they're not congruent across the globe. So it's the evolution that I think is important to try and understand. And you have to have a handle on it in order to build your own moral and ethical code. You need to look at what the cultural justice means to you and how you're going to uphold that both internally and within the greater public.
I agree, but we gave that away. We gave that away. We gave that away to a system. And so right now what we're talking about is our own individual understandings of righteousness, but that's all being given away to a bigger machine called the justice system here in North America or there in Africa or wherever it is in the world, there is now a justice machine that takes care of all of these decisions for us. What I think is right and wrong currently today that's happening in the legal system has no bearing. I'll just be irritated that it's not being done righteously, or I'll be happy that that one was done righteously. But at the end of the day, there'll be things that happen that I don't agree with, and there'll be things that I do agree with. But my agency, my input, my ideas, my self belief on what is right and wrong almost has no bearing in the justice machine. And so, what we've given away over time is human understanding of righteousness to a machine that allows us to jump in our cars and go to Starbucks, get a latte, and forget about it because it's taken care of by the machine, you know?
I have a question on that. So it makes me think of the idea of fairness, because I watched a video a little while ago that was talking about how even infants have an innate sense of fairness. If they see something that is unfair, say another infant gets more food than they get, there's an instantaneous reaction to it, so that we have an inbuilt system of parity, of trying to keep things fair.
You see dogs do it. There's dog videos where this happens, right?
Yeah. And so I'm wondering what you guys think on this. Is that, do you think that our sense of fairness has been overlaid onto the justice system so that we don't really see righteousness or justness anymore? We just see whether something seems fair. What do you think?
I think our agency's been stripped. If I sit and watch something on social media or on the news or whatever, and I think, man, that's unfair. Okay, then what? I move on to the next thought, because I know that the moment that I think, man, that's so unfair, I now have a branching point decision. I either accept the fact that the machine is going to do its machine thing, or I tell myself, no, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to change that. But by making that decision, what I'm giving up is the luxury of driving to the coffee shop with my spare time or whatever. And so you've got to give. If you're giving, you've got to give up something else. So if I want to go make changes, I'm now giving up good coffee. You know what I mean? And so humans get to a point in our modern society where there's so much complexity and so many things to do and so many things we want to do, that instead of being, 20,000 years ago on the plains of Africa, where life was super duper simple, man, where you just had to survive and do the right thing. Well, it was easy. You had agency to make impact because life wasn't complicated by all of the white noise distractions that we have in our modern world. You understand?
So, yeah, maybe it was like for a long time, righteousness was sort of implicit within the structure of mammalian society, whether you look at dogs or elephants or humans. There was a natural implicit structure, and the evolution of our mind and the building of our prefrontal cortex and the turning on of whatever it is that creates our thoughts and our patterns and makes us way more intelligent than the other mammals has sort of circumvented what chance is, eliciting is like there is an innate righteousness within all of us. We all kind of are born with what's the difference between right and wrong. And then as time has gone on, what Shaun said, it's actually true. It's been stripped away from us. No longer can we look inside for self-righteousness. We have to look at Hollywood and music stars and your favorite sports player and government, and they're the ones that are dictating with the rules of justice and the rules of righteousness.
This brings up a really interesting thought in my head, and it goes in line with one of the videos I'm going to put up here in a second. But I think perhaps it's the fact that we've removed ourselves from the punishment aspect of justice. Like what Shaun said earlier, right? If there's a transgression, it's brought before the tribe. The tribe says, nope, you're out of here. And we would exile the person or stone them to death or whatever it was. But we would have to take part in that. So we would have to met out justice within our own tribe. So we'd physically be a part of it. But by separating ourselves from the punishment aspect of it, I think we're allowing our sense of justice to be stripped away because we're not enacting any sort of punishment.
It's
And
like
further
if you
to
put
that,
some. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
and further to that, that is occurring, and in parallel, there is a frustration by the individual who knows that that was wrong, then thinks, oh, well, I guess there's nothing I can do about that because the machine is going to take care of it. But I'm frustrated because the machine is going to spend a bunch of money and a bunch of time to then eventually release that person back out into society to do it again. And I'm frustrated by that, but I can't get involved in it. I can't change that. 20,000 years ago, if someone stabbed their neighbor in the eye, it didn't go before the courts for several years to be released back into society. When you stab someone in the eye, the community came together and said, you know what, that was a mistake. And it was called an eye for an eye. That's where justice started. The evaluation of what is right and wrong, the consequences of your action are now X. So it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, and it wasn't time in a cell. It was called eye for an eye. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. What I am saying is that in that moment, that community, that tribe, that 37 people 20,000 years ago said, guess what? You're now missing an eye yourself. That was called instant actionable consequences, where for the next 3-4 generations, everyone knew that the guy without the eye was the guy who stabbed someone else in the eye. And it was a self-fulfilling prophecy of controlling lawlessness. Now, lawlessness and law is a completely different big subject. Justice as a whole, I believe, is the transparent, fair consequences of your actions. Unless, there's another definition that you guys can think of.
Well, yeah, objectively, I think so. And I think one of the problems that Chance was hinting at, and I can't remember the exact words, but it's like, if you're going to put someone to the sword, you have to be the one who's going to swing it.
Right.
And so people are really afraid of the responsibility of righteousness.
Right.
To uphold your own inner ethic to be literally to your death. That is to be the most divine and virtuous person you can be. And there is not very many people like that anymore.
Agreed.
Yeah. I'm going to put up, I got another video, and it's on the destruction of our enemies versus not. So let's take a look at this and then we'll discuss it some more. Here we go.
Needs to be destroyed? Well, yes, we might think, because then we'll have peace and prosperity and everybody will be happy. Of course, that's not what's going to happen. The philosophy of Socrates and Plato gives us a better response. When Socrates asked a friend what justice is, he said, it's helping friends and hurting enemies. According to the philosophy of Socrates, justice is a skill like medicine is a skill. The medical art, properly practiced, makes people more healthy. The skill of justice, properly practiced, makes people more just. It would never make people less just. We might think to benefit a friend is to make them more wealthy or healthy, but for Socrates to really benefit somebody, you make them more virtuous, more just. So if Socrates is right, to practice justice on somebody isn't to destroy them or to harm them, it's to make them better in the best way they can be improved. Socrates' theory of justice really influenced Plato's theory of punishment. Plato held that punishing people is for improving them, not for expressing retaliation.
That's interesting.
What do you got? What are you thinking?
Well, that reminds me of the story in the Bhagavad Gita. If you guys are familiar with that, the character Arjuna is talking to God, and he's going to be going to war against, I think it's his uncle. And he has this huge moral conundrum that he's going to have to commit murder, and he's supposed to be like the most highly divine prince. And he can't wrap his head around the fact that he's about to bring his military force, his full military might, against another military force attempting basically like a coup. And in doing so, he's going to have to slaughter thousands and thousands of people who are his people, but they're fighting on the other side of the line. And in the story, it's Krishna is God, and in this story, and God says, sometimes justice is such that you must commit these acts in order for there to be a greater peace. And that kind of reminds me of my 20 years as a police officer. There are times when you have to do things in the service of the law, which we would also call justice, that don't feel morally and ethically correct, like striking a woman. And unfortunately, as a police officer, there are times in my career where I've had to do that in order to preserve other people's safety or the safety of my partner or the safety of myself. And in everyday circumstances, there's no circumstance where I would ever strike a woman. So I've had to separate myself from my own moral and ethical code in order to put myself into a different bubble, in which was the bubble of justice and the upholding of law.
Interesting. Shaun, you got anything on that?
And so, there's so many things we can talk about on just the subject.
Are we doing this for 5 hours? Because we'll need it.
Right. But I'm rather than go in all of the different directions, I'm gonna stay in this lane with Jay and see where we all go here, because there's two things going on there. There's Jay having to commit an act that he wouldn't normally commit if he wasn't on duty. So now he's put in a position where he has to do something that he doesn't, as a person, perhaps believe in, but as a serving member within a role, he has to. And he's doing that for the greater good. He's doing that for the larger community around him. It's perhaps less about the punishment of the person that is going to get it right then and there. It's about serving and protecting the greater community. But then after the fact, Jay has to reconcile the service aspect with the personal aspect. And I don't think that gets reconciled very well by anyone all the time. And so then there's this consequential action where Jay, when he started off as a young buck, was happy-go-lucky. And then 20 years later, Jay, the human, didn't manage to reconcile all of that stuff because no one can. And it builds up to a point where now Jay suffers the consequences of his rightful actions. And so my proposal is this. This is what I would love to see. And I don't know how it would play out. Obviously, I've never created it. But I feel that in the very near future, what mankind will have to do, and this is going to freak a bunch of people out because they're going to think that I'm like a globalist or something. I don't know. But I believe that AI is going to have to get involved. I believe that artificial intelligence is going to have to be a neutral party to these kind of justice moments, the justice system. I'm not talking about on the ground, but perhaps that'll be robotics in the future. But the justice system as a whole, I think that will be replaced by artificial intelligence based on its neutrality, because at its core, justice is the belief that the right things are being done transparently. Because right now, I don't know how much transparency there is out in all of the various, from municipal court all the way up to world courts, how righteous their righteous acts are. Because of human biases, because of angles, because of you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. AI isn't party to that. It is a neutral body. However, no matter how transparent, how perfect AI evaluates a situation, there will still need to be a human overseeing body, either in the moment as it stands there next to the robot in the court, or as a global body where standards are as such, but right next to the transparent standards is a human with empathy who can involve themselves in the moment and say, hey, listen, you're right, robot, perfectly right. However, as a human to a human, I need to step in and tweak this approach. Now, I'm using very simple language, and in the spirit of things, I could build that all out, of course. But I think the message gets across that in the future, I see AI being a judging body. I feel that the records of the judging will be blockchain transparency that can't be crippled by any outside agency with nefarious scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and a human with empathy to make sure that it's all wrapped up in a nice little Christmas package.
With a nice little bow on top.
Mhm.
I was thinking that one of the real challenges with crime and punishment is that a lot of times punishment it's almost final. I mean, I think back to, you were talking eye for an eye. You look at a lot of countries where, you steal something, you lose a hand. Done. Off it goes. So you don't get that hand back, obviously, and so you see anybody without a hand, and they're a thief, and then that creates a biases at any point in time for that person the rest of their life. So I like the fact that you brought up empathy required, because there are extenuating circumstances in a lot of areas, especially. I'm just gonna. The image of Aladdin comes into my head, right? Like you're starving, you're homeless, you have no other choice. You have to steal something. You get caught. Now you lose a hand. Like, if there's no empathy in that situation, now you're without a hand. And you're still in the same situation, because you're going to get tossed out on the street. You're going to be missing a hand. You're still going to be starving. You're still going to be homeless. So it's not solving any of the problems. It's just crime and punishment.
Agreed.
Versus,
and so I used a really strong message, eye for an eye. We've all heard it a bajillion times.
Yep.
It's not like it's new news. But I use that specifically to like go, whoa, what's he talking about? Whoa, that's a bit strong. Of course, a strong message. I don't believe in an eye for an eye in every single instance. What I do believe is fairness. I believe in actually the spirit of justice, which is fair, transparent, appropriate consequences for someone's actions. And so if a robot is involved and a human applies empathy and blockchain tracks it, and now you've got your record, then what? So you've been adjudicated. You know what's going to happen next, but what's next? And so that is also a big part of the justice trajectory. If someone wags their finger at you and says, well, now you're guilty, then what? Because right now what we have is like all kinds of possibilities. You might go to jail, you might do this, it might be community service, it might be pay a fine, it might be all kinds of things. But it seems to me that a lot of these things aren't solving the problem of repeat offense of unjust actions. And so then what is it? So to play with the AI thing again, just because I got robots in my head, possibly that will be a case of AI. I don't know. It could be a centralized hub in a city or a centralized hub in a town. Now, this is going to be very science fiction and very globalist, and people will be super annoyed with me. But there may have to be a need in the future where there is a hub of justice, where there are specialists within the hub of justice. You walk into the justice hall and you sit down across from the robot who impartially assesses the situation with a human next to them with their empathy to say, the robot's right, but, let's dial it back a bit, robot. The next step is, now you've got to go pay consequences. And what would that be? And I don't just think it can be an eye for an eye. It has to be something that builds the human up into a better version of themselves that they should have been right from the get-go. And so how does that play out? How does the future justice system improve the consequential phase of the justice action?
That sounds like Minority Report.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So being personally just includes fairness and empathy. So like it's touching on all those things. I looked it up. Like, what does it mean to be just, personally just? And Chance, you set that list. Was it you that had that list from a page in a book?
Yep.
And there were several points there that were pointing to what it means to be just or personally or self-righteous.
Yep.
And I've said this many times, both in my own on my own channel and on podcasts, but we went away from philosophy a long time ago. And in doing so, we've been blinded by the world, by global politics, by government overreach. And so the philosophy of what just and justice means is completely gone. It's been annihilated. And I think that's one of the things we need to get back to. You know, when AI becomes the minority report of Shaun's future world, we're going to need a panel of really smart people to insert what he's saying there, empathy and human judgment, which will probably not be easily included in an AGI system. And so it will require the human touch, but what it will require more is that people get together and philosophize about what it really means to be self-righteous.
Honestly,
Because-
that's where it all starts.
Yeah.
So when do you get taught justice? When do you get taught to be a righteous person?
As a
And
child.
so, you could say, okay, well, when I was growing up, when I was 6 years old, my dad used to take me to church, and the pastor used to teach me how to be righteous. But then you go down half a block, and there's a family that just doesn't believe in anything. Then you go 4 blocks down, and there's a family that just believes in criminality. And so you can take 10 slices of your community, and there will be 10 different versions of what justice means and what righteous means and what being ethical and moral means and just being a freaking good human means. And everybody's got their own definition of it. And when you're 6, if you're not taught it formally ever in your life from that point on, you just make it up. And you make it up through who's around you, through your culture, through your society, through what you expect you can and can't get away with. And so if no one's guiding you within your family unit, if no one's guiding you within your community, if no one's guiding you within the schooling system, if no one's guiding you at work, where do you make up your version of righteousness?
This is I've had this click into my head a little while ago, and I've been trying to flush it out for a little while. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Shaun, because you brought up the idea of being guided to justice. And I think back to the military, where there were lots of times where I did something wrong and I was doing push-ups, or somebody else did something wrong
100%.
and I was doing push-ups, right? And the issue that I had at the time was I didn't have leaders explaining to me why that was happening. It was just, Jay didn't bring his hat, now we're all doing friggin' push-ups. Great. Thanks, Jay, right? And so my anger, my disappointment in the situation went towards Jay, rather than later on in my career when I did have leaders who were trying to explain this stuff to me, was it's not about him. It's about me. It's about my sense of justice. So if we're all doing push-ups because Jay didn't wear his hat, well, I should have been on that ahead of time. I should have been making sure, hey man, Jay, did you bring your hat? Last time we did push-ups because you did whatever. So I think when you start saying, like, where does it start? It starts with leadership. It starts with people explaining what it is to be just. It starts with conversations like this.
Guiding the way.
Yep.
Guiding the way. And I think that's the key to it, at least. And I got a ton of comments.
Freaking hit him, buddy. Do your job, for goodness sakes.
I didn't want to get involved,
Don't make us hold you accountable.
Dude, this is beautiful. I got just so many on both the Instagram and here. So we'll start on the YouTube side here. Celtic jumped in here early, and he's like, North Sentinel Island, an island off India where it's forbidden to visit. We were talking about that earlier, just adding to the conversation. Hi all, happy Wednesday. Good to see you, buddy. He says the last person there who visited was killed by the tribe. Yeah, that's 100%. He goes on to say, every day I try to survive. After prostate cancer and the terrible side effects, I had to discover interest and reasons to enjoy life. I choose travel, meeting people, and my grandson. That's self-guided justice, right? He felt a physical injustice, a sickness, whatever, and then carried on from there.
Yeah, so hang on a sec.
yeah.
Before you bounce on, pull that down so that we're not all distracted. Just want to focus on Celtic Mix, the Mickers for a sec. Like, he raises a good point. No matter how Mick has lived his life up till now, and I know he served in the commandos, so frickin' rah-rah, sis boom bah. He's a righteous dude right from an early age, but that doesn't mean that he stayed righteous all the way through his life. And so now he's in this phase of his life where he's doing things differently. And I lost track of Mick a long time ago, but now he's back on the radar. I'm on track with Mick, but I don't know what he did for 20 odd years. He could have been a freaking villain. I just know good dude. I don't know the sandwich meat in between, you know what I mean? And so, when I read that, I think, okay, so after prostate cancer, like in 2 weeks, I'll be flying down to California to see my buddy Marlon, who's just gone through his second cancer, one of them being, well, it doesn't matter. So I feel, not just because he's my friend, but I feel compelled to fly down there for my second year to visit him because he's a freaking awesome dude. And he deserves my time. And I think that that is an act of righteousness. That righteousness isn't always consequence negative. Righteousness is consequence positive as well. I'm going to spend resources, time, money to go see my buddy, and I'm going to love every minute of it. And it's not because of his cancer situation. It's because he's a freaking awesome dude. And I think that justice should be also considered as doing the right thing for good people, and there's no criminality involved, you know?
Yeah. If I want to expand that, because it's been something I've been studying lately, and it's pretty interesting. There is an archetype to the self-righteous built into ancient history, built into scripture and Eastern philosophy. And everywhere you look, there are characters in ancient writing that are divinely self-righteous. And your friend that was just commenting is following in that archetype. So I'm going to give the story of Job from the Old Testament. If you know it at all, the story is basically that Job is a very righteous man. He's never done any harm, and then life turns on him, and it becomes a total catastrophe. He loses everything: his family, his home, his job, all of his contacts. He's stoned and beaten by the public, and it all seems like a punishment from God. And I'm not a very religious person, but the idea built into this is his self-righteousness is so powerful that even in the face of destructive tyranny, he never loses his faith in the good, and always still looking for the good in life. And that's an archetype that has followed history, and it's always written about. And why don't we learn about that? Because that would be a good way to model yourself. Right? It's like, don't bleed on other people when you're bleeding. It's kind of like that. It's been said so many different ways, but there's deep truth in that. And Shaun just mentioned it as well. People can go through horrifying catastrophes, and then they come out and they're still smiling, and they're still willing to do good for life and for the people around them.
I think that stems from the internal concept of justice, right? What is just is up to me. And it's not up to you. It's not up to Shaun. It's not up to anybody, other commenters or anybody watching. For me, for Jay, your concept of justice, you're going to be pulling it from any sources that you have. I'm going to be doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
And to that archetype concept is that if the average person, and this average person that lives out in the world that we talk about a lot of times, the people, usually is an external view. It's not an internal view. It has everything to do with, why is that thing happening to me? Or why does that happen to this person? Or why isn't this person doing something to help? Or it's an external view of the thing. And Shaun and I have had many conversations on this, but
when are they gonna?
Exactly. Versus, what can I do right now? And to that point, John Minari jumped in here a little while ago and he says, my version of justice is the moral courage to right wrongs, to protect the vulnerable and restore balance, regardless of what laws or powers may dictate. And
very well said.
I've said this many times about police, is that, in my view, their job shouldn't be to enforce the law, but interpret the law, right? It's, if I see somebody jaywalking across the street, I shouldn't run over there and give them a ticket. You should inform them, hey man, you know that's dangerous. Probably shouldn't do that. Like, that's what I see. But if you see the same dude doing the same thing 4 or 5 times, like, okay, now you're going to get a ticket, kind of deal. So the interpretation of what it is that is just is a very personal thing. And I think we farm it out to everybody else a lot.
So if I can use your example, and it's a good example to make this point. If the officer sees someone jaywalking, it's their responsibility to adjust that action. And so they can do it through a number of means. And let's pretend for a moment that they decide to advise the person, hey, I just want to let you know that it's kind of dangerous crossing here. Someone died here yesterday. And the reason that I'm informing you of this is by law. Really, this is called jaywalking, and it's much safer to just head down to the corner where you won't die, cross across the street on those white stripes. And so maybe that's the move. But then 2, 3, 12 times later, the same person is jaywalking. Then what? So now the officer is having to use their own internal compass to make decisions on how many iterations until they throw out that ticket. And so maybe as a rookie, a person does that 6, 7, 12, 1,000 times. But then 10 years in, 15 years in, jaded, bummed, knows how this all works, knows that that same jaywalker is never going to adjust their ways. In fact, they might just flip you the bird as they're walking across the street jaywalking. They understand that the simple model is far more complex because humans are complex and every interaction is a different interaction. And so from a simple perspective, Chance, I agree that there are always, every moment has the opportunity to be done in a better way. But when you try your best year after year, the jadedness starts to step in. The realizations that humans are humans and not all humans will play fairly. And we're talking fair now within the game. And Jay, you would be the best person on this panel right now to, speak to that, I think.
Yeah, well, I've got a bit of a police story about that. I was never one of those police officers that was interested in writing tickets. I lived in my hometown. It just wasn't my thing. So I would pull a person over and I would quote educate them on, why. And then one day a senior officer pulled me aside and he was talking about an incident that occurred in Southern Ontario where a person who had been let off on more than 30 speeding charges, given reduced fines or given warnings, was rocking down a major highway and took out a family. And so the moral implication of that is that justice could have been served 29 times ago, and maybe that person would have gotten the message and a family would have been alive. And so there's a real big struggle in balancing equality in how you serve justice. And I think as being self-righteous is trying to advocate for equality in all aspects of life, while also using, not necessarily being jaded or angry, but finding the wisdom to recognize the subjective time that you need to use justice in order to preserve life or to teach a lesson, quote unquote. And that one stuck with me for a long time. I never forgot that because I could recall, I don't know how many times, dozens and dozens of times when I let men and women off for speeding or seatbelt infractions or other, kind of risky behavior behind the wheel. And then when I started to think about this in my own mind, I'm thinking, well, what if that person's going to be the next person that drives like a maniac and takes out a family because the police were being lenient over and over again?
Well, what we're talking about now is that not only were you being lenient, but you were encouraging it.
Literally, yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, and I had to
it is a
swallow that.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep.
28 times, keep on keeping on, bro. Here's your warning.
Mhm.
And so, it's encouraging poor actions. And so worse yet is while Jay or an officer is in that moment making their own personal determinations of what's right and wrong, that may not fit into what's right and wrong for society as a whole.
Bingo.
And I do believe, and this is just my casual observation because I'm pretty much a layman when it comes to the letter of the law. Having been an instructor at the Ontario Police College for nearly a year, my observation was this. The job of the police college was to take someone off the sidewalk who knew nothing about policing and in about 3 months turn them into a police officer. And the bulk of that time that they spent at the police college was like just trying to get in shape, just trying to understand how to spell code of conduct, or just learning things that they knew nothing about, which was mostly learning about the machine and how the machine worked. Half of the program was not spent on, let's talk about your own personal idea of justice. Where did you learn justice? What does justice mean to you, little Jenny in the back? That was just not a thing. And so if you're not taught what is just, if all you're taught is the machine, then every single person has their own version of what is fair and what isn't. And therefore, for one person, it will be, bro, you're getting a freaking speeding ticket because I see what's going on here. Whereas another person will be, I don't think he's going to do it again. I'm gonna let him off. He smiled at me the right way. I feel like he's a good person inside my feels. And so these are things that are at odds with each other, but only one side, the machine, is the covered side, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This is quite interesting. I had an instructor when I was in basic that took us all aside and was like, we have a class on ethics, right? Let's talk about what ethics are. And he gave us this whole, the PowerPoint presentation. We're all in basic, right? So we're just had no idea. We were barely listening. And he goes, okay, so now besides the PowerPoint presentation, let's talk about it personally. And he started going into stories of his time in Bosnia and that whole issue, like all of the issues that were the ethical issues surrounding the peacekeepers in Bosnia. And he gave some examples that were really difficult to try to manage out. And we were sitting in a classroom, not with a rifle on the ground right there. And oh, you're muted, John.
With the luxury of time.
Exactly. So I love the fact that you brought that up, how many times you actually sit down and discuss these things, because it's not, I'm just gonna mute him there. Because
Yeah,
it's not
no worries.
normally done. You don't get a lot of experience talking about it. You get a lot of experience doing it, like having to make those ethical choices rather than discussing it prior to them happening. Usually afterwards, when you have some more time and have some hindsight. But what do you think, Jake?
Yeah. Well, I think what that ends up meaning is that self-righteousness internally is an evolution, and it requires you to be able to look back in the past and analyze what has happened, and then using that to move forward in a more just way. And without knowledge and experience, which I don't really know what wisdom is, but maybe it's sort of a combination of knowledge and wisdom. Maybe you can sort of crank up the knob on self-righteousness and become a better person after you've made mistakes. And I don't know if you can just all of a sudden wake up one day and be self-righteous. I think there's trial and tribulation in that. And I'll use my police career as the example. At the early part of my career, that's what I was doing. I was giving everybody a break. And then when I started to realize that that wasn't the case, that there wasn't going to be a good way to carry on as a police officer if everybody got a break, because then everybody in my community would always expect a break from me. Uh-oh, delivery day. And so I had to change my moral and ethical stance on how I was going to exercise the execution of law. And an old police officer that I did a lot of ride-alongs with before I got my uniform had a policy, and his policy was strict is fair. And it was based on this, that if you treat the law and every person the same way, maybe you'll be able to sleep a little better at night. Maybe there's a reason why the law is there on a sort of a more grand, sort of like objective scale, the scale of my province, for example. And after I learned that, and then I heard about this story of this guy who killed a family, I had to change my moral and ethical stance. I thought I was being self-righteous and being forgiving as a policeman. I thought I was being the community cop, the one that everybody would like. But what I realized was that everybody was just going to end up treading on me. And so I had to change my stance, and I had to change what I felt was fair and what the definition of fairness was for me. And so somewhere at around like the 10 or 11 year mark, and it took me a while, somewhere around the 10 or 11 year mark in my career, I made a decision to become strict is fair. And what that meant for me was and this sounds arrogant, but whatever. I would, as a police officer, I would run my program like this. If I found a violation, I would execute it. If I had to tell somebody a rule or to enact, if I had to do an arrest or if I had to take control of a situation, it had to be my way. There was no choices or options, and I had to get away from this idea that being a community cop was the best situation. I had to act as though the law was more supreme than my moral and ethical code. And in doing so, I felt morally and ethically better because I was serving justice consistently.
I like that. Now, I I actually got a video specifically on this. And I was gonna agree.
There we go. All
I
right.
can put it. I'm going to put it up here in a second. I just want to see if Shaun has any thoughts before we jump on it.
Just that I think that I agree with, well, whatever I missed as I was getting my brand new laptop delivered. Yes. What I was thinking when I came into the conversation, as Jay said, that is, there's not much of a difference between policing and military in this respect. That the standard is the standard, man. The standard isn't open to your interpretation. If the standard is do 25 knuckle push-ups, you ain't doing 21. You're doing 25, period. And it's my job to enforce that. And if you can't meet the standard, I'll find somewhere else for you. And so the standard is the standard. It is not open to your freaky little personal interpretation. And when it comes to justice, particularly if someone doesn't even understand their own definition of justice, how can they impart their distorted sense of justice in their own bizarre feeling of what the standard is? That is a road to ruin.
Yeah, I agree. Let's watch this video and then we'll talk about it because it's gonna put some wrenches in gears. I think. Here we go.
Euclid's first common notion is this: things which are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. That's a rule of mathematical reasoning. It's true because it works. Has done and always will do. In his book, Euclid says this is self-evident. You see, there it is, even in that 2,000-year-old book of mechanical law. It is a self-evident truth that things which are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. We begin with equality. That's the origin, isn't it? That balance, that's fairness. That's justice.
Bam. So we began the conversation on legality does not mean justice, but the execution of legality in the fact that it is a standard, it is a rule set across the board, can deliver justice. What do you guys think?
I think your key word is can.
Yep,
Yeah,
I agree.
I struggle. I really do struggle with that. Is a wrench in my gears. And I'll use murder as an example. This is a philosophical thing that has to do with justice and the serving of justice, or the serving of law, or the protection of law. Committing murder is not always a heinous first-degree crime. And this is my opinion. This has nothing to do with what the law says. This is my opinion. If a gangbanger goes and shoots up a 7-Eleven and kills a 6-year-old boy, that person should be tried and, given the full penalty of the law. But if a father kills the rapist that raped his daughter, I don't believe that justice should be served the same way. And so, unfortunately, I'm not as smart as Euclid, that's for damn sure. But I don't believe that we are all equal. I don't believe that we may be equal in the eyes of the law objectively, but subjectively, I do believe that it requires a very thoughtful eye to determine what the punishment should be based on what justice is supposed to serve.
And again, this is why I think these conversations are important, right? Is that
And that's just one example, right? That's
Exactly.
just one of a million, of an infinity of situations where, and every situation, we all know this, every situation is different, but the law is the law. So then there's a spectrum of what you did, whether you stole a chocolate bar or whether you committed like grand theft auto or some form of, major larceny, or you, robbed the Dow, I don't know, robbed the Toronto Stock Exchange of billions because you had insider trading. It is a spectrum, but the law just spells it out. If you've done this, it's this. And so it's the human condition that has to be inputted into justice and law in order for things to be, quote, fair. And that's why I struggle with things like equity, and why I don't think that people are equal.
Yeah. Is the standard
Physics.
issue. Yeah.
Physics are awesome. Physics can work with complex structures, but physics doesn't apply to humans. And so the equality of physics doesn't work within human society, within human life. And so, as an example, one man can kill millions, but won't be held accountable and may never even be recognized for it. If a white collar villain on Wall Street robs 10,000 families spread across North America by stealing their money in a pyramid scheme, Bernie, if all of that can be done, and within those 10,000 families, 10 men kill themselves, suicide, because they're now destitute, and they made a mistake by believing that investing in Bernie, I will present a better future for my family. And in that single decision, their family wealth is wiped out because of some white-collar crook who, through their pyramid scheme, robs them of all their money, but won't be held accountable, may never even be found as the reason for 10,000 families to be destitute now. And so with the advent of crypto, who's being held accountable? Where is the justice of the hundreds of thousands of people who've been schemed out of their wealth or out of their pennies by an invisible, soulless, nameless face that will never be discovered? That in itself is criminality that has perhaps a bigger ripple-on effect multi-generationally than dropping an atomic bomb. And so crime, as we understand it within the physics context, it doesn't work for me. Physics isn't malleable enough for the human condition.
I think it was Stalin that said, if you kill one person, it's murder. You kill a million, it's a statistic. And I think that is the
wow. Yeah, that's good.
I mean, it's so accurate in the statement, in the fact of the more people it affects, the less personal it becomes, except for the people that it affects, obviously. But if you're outside the system, you just see big numbers. It's like, yeah, man, that's rough. But you have no concept to like actually conceptualize it in your own head and personalize it, because there's no personal aspect to it. It becomes a statistic. And I think that's part of the challenge. Now, we are just about an hour right now, and we've gone kind of all ranges here. I have a couple more comments I want to hit on, and then I think we can do some final thoughts on this. But first, I just want to say thank you, guys. Shaun, Jay, fantastic convo. This has been super fun for me to enjoy. Right off the bat, on the Instagram side, Annie Oakley jumped in here. He said, "Good morning, team. Just going to say how great it is to see and hear my good friend Jay. Tears of pride came yesterday as I listened to Talking to Horses 2.0. Well done, and you do have more gray hair." So
that is
be aware.
indeed true. I'm getting close to Shaun here with the.
There you go. And then McWalks jumped on here. Celtic McWalks. He says, "Would suck if you lost a hand in a farming accident. Judge before reason." That's when I was talking about missing a hand.
Mhm.
And then
well, just hang on a sec. So
okay.
yeah, so he's right. It would suck if you lost your hand, because maybe, you were the robber who needs to lose a hand, but now you're negatively impacting your community because now you're only farming with one hand. And so consequences of actions aren't just on the individual. As I was saying, Bernie Madoff, someone robs you of all your wealth invisibly. The consequence of that isn't just a hand or two hands. It's your family. It's multi-generational. And so these little impactors aren't just on the individual, but they're on all the people around them,
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff and Sherry Lalonde jumped in here and said, let's not forget the saying eye for an eye ends with a son for a son. And I think that's a great point, is that it does escalate very quickly. And then jumped in here and says, sometimes the ticket is the lesson. I think that's a great point too, is that, as you said, the standard is the standard. And there's a whole bunch more. I don't have time to get into all the ones on the Instagram side. Do appreciate the comments. This is awesome to see people getting involved in the conversation. Let's get some final thoughts. Jay, any final thoughts on justice?
Yeah, what Shaun just said is a little saying, a little aphorism that says, the action of one man is the action of every man. And it kind of ties into what you said, Chance, about having to do push-ups because your buddy forgot his hat. We're all in this. It's a collective. I mean, you guys have the title right here. And then I wrote something down a while ago, and it got back up to here because of the topic of justice, that maybe to be self-righteous is to have faith and courage. And maybe it's the two of those that make you self-righteous. The faith to believe in yourself and your morals and ethics, and the courage to stand by them in the face of tyranny. And that's all I have to say.
Like it. Shaun, final thoughts?
Well, then I'll just play with that a little bit and just say that I agree. But I don't think you can just get by on those two things. Well, you need faith in yourself, but you need faith in your fellow man. Otherwise, you're standing alone, believing in yourself, but not believing in anyone around you. And at some point, I believe all of us have to look around and give someone a chance. Have some faith that they're going to step up and do the righteous thing. And I think that holds a lot of people back. We barely trust ourselves sometimes, so it's hard to trust someone else. We don't have enough faith in ourselves, so how can we have faith in our fellow man? And it's a glib statement. Have faith in your fellow man. But we've all been let down so many times that sometimes it's just freaking hard to keep having the faith. But I think that's what we got to do. We got to believe in ourselves, and we got to believe in those around us.
Yeah, I agree. I think I have one final thought, and it comes in form of the quote that I put up on my stories just a couple of days ago. It's from the book Right Thing Right Now by Ryan Holiday. And it says, we must understand justice is not this thing we demand of other people, but something we demand of ourselves. Justice can be the standards we hold ourselves to, the way we treat other people, the promises we keep, the integrity we bring to our words, the loyalty and generosity we give to our friends, the opportunities we accept and turn down, and the things we care about, and the differences we make for others. And I think that is where I'm going to shut it down. I really do appreciate the conversation. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next time. Chimo.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.